Not been here in a while. We are starting a new series, or we're in a new series called I'm Not Okay. And last week I talked about this idea of being overwhelmed. How 94% of young adults would consider themselves overwhelmed. But this week, continuing on this idea and this theme of being not okay, I came across a different statistic, and it's about the topic of doubt. And I found that 65% of people that identify themselves as Christian would say they deal with doubt. And when you look at young American Christians and how they experience God, we find that those that are young actually doubt God has increased by 15% in the last 5 years. We're able to see that millennials actually doubt twice as much of any other generation. And Gen Z, our generation, is actually the generation that is the least Christian generation that we've seen yet here in America. And it goes back to this idea of doubt. And I found this quote this past week, and I wanted to read it to you today, and it should be up on the screen. Because this is kind of the definition a little bit. We're going to talk about doubt tonight, and I wanted to read it just before we start. It says, doubt is an unexpected mystery, an unresolved lingering question. Doubt is when you're fixed on the edge of your seat, uneaten popcorn sitting in your mouth, clawing at your neighbor's arm, unable to take your eyes off the screen, although you wish you could. Doubt presses you to reevaluate the story of your life. What are your values? What do you believe? What direction do you want to go? Like water between two banks, doubt creates a space for divergent outcomes. And when we talk about this idea of doubt, I want to also, again, be honest with you guys, and this is something that I really do struggle with. We look at Enneagram types, I'm a type 6, but one of the things that our biggest fear of type 6s are either fear itself or doubt. And when I started to look through the list of things that lately that I've been honestly doubting a lot lately, I made a list, and it includes whether I should have fixed my car, I recently moved into a new home, what paint colors we should have chosen. I've doubted some of my job changes, some of the changes we've even made here within the Young Adults Ministry. I've doubted whether I'm actually enough, whether I'll be a good father someday, whether I'm leading my fiance well during this time. And even during this time, these last couple of weeks, I've been doubted whether if I reveal my sin to other people, will people still accept me for who I am? And one thing I've also really been wrestling with lately is when I don't see God moving, is he actually moving? Is he actually present in my life, or is he just somewhere out there? And it's in this inward wrestle with doubt that often in my own life, and what I've seen, especially within the Christian culture, what we often do with doubt is we pit it against faith. That doubt is the opposite of faith. And tonight, what I want to try to do is I want to try to flip that script. Now, for so often in so many people's lives, and again, specifically within the Christian community, we see doubt as a negative thing. And what I hope to show us tonight is that doubt is not a negative thing. It's a neutral thing. It is what we do with our doubt that determines our actions. See, my hope tonight is that you will see that doubt is not where faith ends, but actually where trust begins. That deep faith calls us from the other side of our agonizing doubt, and that doubt can actually draw you closer and create a more deeper, intimate, vulnerable, and gritty relationship with God. And the way I hope to kind of show you that today is we're going to look at a passage in Genesis chapter 32. We're going to be back in the Old Testament. We're going to be in the first book of the Bible. So get your Bibles with you. Go to the beginning of the book. And we're going to be in chapter 32. We're going to look at the story of Jacob wrestling with God. So if you have your Bibles, turn there. They'll also be on the screen. But before we get started, will you actually just bow your heads and will you pray with me as we get started tonight? Dear Lord Jesus, Lord, we come to you today and we thank you. We thank you that you are God and we are not. Lord, we all come in here with different doubts, with different insecurities, with different things going on in our lives. But my prayer and our hope today is that we can hand these over to you. That we would learn to wrestle, that we would learn to come to you with all of our doubts and insecurities because we want them. So Lord, would you help us today just to open up our hearts, open up our minds to what your word has to say. May none of this be my own words, but Spirit, you script every one of them. If there's anything from me, when people forget it, but Lord, I pray that if there's anything of you, anything that is true about who you are in your nature, I pray that you plant a seed inside of each and every person in this room, and that we can leave here more in love with you. So Lord, we love you so much. In your precious and holy name. Amen. So again, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 32, and we're going to actually start in verse 6. And we're going to be looking at what is Jacob wrestling with God. Before we start there, I need to give a little bit of background and context, because we're going to see two major people in this story. We're going to see the story of Jacob and the story of Esau. Now, Jacob and Esau were brothers. They're twins. While they may be twins, they could not be more unlike. One was a really hairy dude, and one was a guy that didn't have a lot of hair. One was an absolute mama's boy. He loved to be inside the kitchen, cooking inside. While Esau, he loved to be outside hunting in the woods, and he was his father's son. And all of this, there's this tension that we see in Esau and Jacob's relationship. To the point that Jacob actually at one point steals Esau's birthright. And then when he goes to steal his blessing, he actually deceives his father by putting on sheepskin and going to him when his father was blind and deaf in order to receive the blessing that was meant for Esau. And as a result, after Jacob deceives his father and steals Esau's birthright, Esau, one, was very upset, but two, he made a promise. He said, I am going to kill Esau for what he did. And as a result, Jacob starts running away, and he runs off into the land of Canaan, and he goes there, and he goes there for 14 years. He gains 2 different wives, and here he is back in the story in chapter 32. And what we're going to see here is God is calling him actually back to the land that he came from, back into the place that Esau was. And this is where we're going to take off in this story. And again, we're looking at this through a lens of doubt. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at 3 different points what I believe is going to help us overcome our doubt. And the first one that I believe we have to do in the midst of our doubt is we got to pray to God. So I want us to turn again to Genesis chapter 32. We're going to be in verse 6. I want to go ahead and read for us today. So it says, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they went to your brother Esau, and he said, he is coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided up the people into 2 camps, the flocks, the herds, and the camels. He thought if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the remaining one cannot escape. I'm going to pause there for a second, because remember, the very last words that he heard from his brother before he left was, I am going to kill you. And now he's going back into the land, and a servant comes to him one day and says, guess what? Esau's coming, but he has 400 men alongside him coming to what he probably thinks to attack him. And this was Jacob's response. We're going to continue reading, and it says this, and then in verse 9 it says, then Jacob said, to God my father Abraham and God my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. Indeed, I crossed over to Jordan with my staff, and now become 2 camps. Please rescue me from my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. Otherwise he would come to attack me, my mothers, and my children. You have said, I will cause you to prosper, and I will make you an offspring like the land of the sea, too numerous to be counted. So here is Jacob. He finds himself in this situation, and he finds himself in between 2 different things. And this is where I believe doubt takes place. Because doubt is just basically this idea that you're caught between 2 different things. It comes from a Latin word meaning 2. I love it. In a description that I read this week, it's talked about it being the knife's edge. It causes us to float between 2 different possible outcomes. And if you go back to the last slide real quick, because I want us to notice something in verse 9. Here he is, one outcome he has sitting here is that he's told by God, and he ends up, you can see that in quotes. He's referencing back to chapter 31, verse 3. And God tells you to go back to the land that I brought you from, and I will end up delivering you into a prosperous land. So when you go to the next slide real quick, this is what he's repeating. He's saying, God, You made me this promise, and now you have to hold me through this. Because again, he's trying to hold on to the promises of God, but on the other side of his doubt, it's 400 men with his brother Esau ready to kill him. And right now, in this moment, I want us to notice what he does. That when he's afraid and he's in this in-between, the first response he does is he goes to God in prayer. He goes to God and he wants us to be vulnerable with him. And I love this because honestly, this is a big difference between doubt and unbelief. You see, there's this misconception in culture today that doubt is the same as unbelief. Doubt is not the same as unbelief. Doubt says, I am unsure of what is right, while unbelief says, I don't care about what is right. And in this moment, he is doubting whether God is going to show up. He's not unbelieving that what God said is true. But it's in this moment, in this time of deep doubt, that he's going to God in prayer and holding him fast to what he said. And this is where I believe it's what we need to do in these situations is we need to go to God in prayer and be completely honest with him. I love this quote that I found in this book that I'm going to continually quote throughout the day. It's by Dominic Dunn. It says, true prayer weeps, shouts, and groans. It actively waits for God to show up. Prayer is speaking the truth about and over our doubts. Prayer is the space between expectations and your doubts and God's healing. It's a moment when you can let it all out, not caring who is watching. Prayer is shameless, outrageous, flagrant, and a dance of the wounded soul. And this is what I believe that we need to do ourselves, is we need to go to God honestly with our own prayers. I remember back to a moment when I was actually at GCU in college, that there was this moment that I was, it was my junior year of college, and I was possibly trying to get into a relationship. And I remember being super confused about the whole situation, and I basically went around campus going on what I call was a prayer yell. I know this kind of sounds crazy because I love going on prayer walks, but this one was absolutely a prayer yell. I was going around the baseball field, which was kind of secluded, almost yelling out to God. I was singing, I was yelling, I was frustrated, and all these different things, basically saying, God, what are you doing? But it was in this moment that I was laying out complete honesty before God, saying, this is where I'm currently at, and God, I need your help in it. This kind of goes off a little bit last week of talking about being overwhelmed. This comes to this point saying, God, I don't know what to do, but I'm turning to you. And this is what we see Jacob does. When he is overwhelmed, the first thing he does is he goes to God to prayer. But I believe the second thing what we need to start to learn is, when it comes to overcoming doubt, is the art of the wrestle. So what we're going to read here now is we're going to read a story that takes place in Genesis chapter 32, and we're going to start in verse 24 if you have your Bibles. And I need to give a little context of what takes place in between these two moments. So after what just took place, what Jacob ends up doing is he starts to make his own plan. He divides his family into 3 different parties, he starts giving gifts, and he starts sending them out to Esau, trying to almost ease him away. Well, not ease him away, but it allows him the opportunity that when they meet him, both of these gifts will create a bond between them, and he won't actually attack them. So he divides his family, he crosses over the Jordan, and then he brings his family on the other side of the Jordan, and then he comes back alone by himself. And all of a sudden we find himself in this story in Genesis chapter 32, verse 4, and this is where we take off. I want to continue reading here. It says this, it says, Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. And then he said to Jacob, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked Jacob. He said, Jacob, he replied. Your name will no longer be Jacob, he said. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. And then Jacob said to him, please tell me your name. But he answered, why do you ask me my name? And then blessed him. And then verse 30 says, and then Jacob named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life was spared and shone on him as he passed by, limping because of his hip. There's a few things that I want us to notice with this passage. If you go back 2 different slides to the beginning in verse 24, I want us to notice something. That here he is, Jacob, he finds himself again. The army's still coming. 400 men. He's probably nervous out of his mind, and all of a sudden, one man comes and he starts wrestling with him. It is in this moment that they wrestle all night, and as the sun begins to rise, and in their fighting, in their wrestling, all of a sudden, in this moment, man says, "Will you stop fighting?" And Jacob says, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And I want to ask the question, why does Jacob ask for a blessing? See, blessings back then in the time was the highest virtue that you could do to someone. That was actually bestowing on them the beauty and the grace and the favor of God. So he's asking what he thinks of this random guy. Would you bless me in the midst of it? But what do we know about the story? What we know about the story from what we just read is that we know that he's wrestling with God. And notice God's response. His response is he asks for Jacob's name. And let me ask you, why does the creator of the universe, the one who knows every single hair on our head, why does he ask for Jacob's name? See, what I believe is he asks for Jacob's name, not for God's sake, but for Jacob's sake. Because the last time Jacob was asked for his name, he lied. See, remember he deceived his father. He dressed up in a sheep's clothing. He went to his father and said, "Who is this?" And Jacob said, "My name is Esau." But here in this moment, notice what Jacob does. He does not lie. He's honest with God, and he says, "My name is Jacob." And you know what Jacob means? Jacob means it literally means a heel snatcher, a heel grabber. But basically, if any Hebrew person used that back in the day, what it basically meant is that you were a deceiver. If you were called a heel snatcher, you were known as a deceiver. And that's what Jacob was. His entire life, he was deceiving people. He lied to his brother, stole a birthright, lied to his father, ran over, went to Laban, deceived Laban multiple different times. Now here he is going back, finally kind of obeying where God has. And God asks him, what is his name? In order to see if Jacob would be honest with him. And in the middle of our own doubts, in the middle of our own insecurities, what we need to do is we need to go to God and sometimes say, will you just be honest with me? He'll ask you a blatant question just to test you to see, will you be honest with me in this moment? And when he does, God says, how he blesses him, I find very interesting. He blesses him by changing his name. He doesn't give him anything, he changes his name. But what we see in the Bible is that changing of a name is actually also a very significant thing. Abram went from Abraham, or was Abram to Abraham. And now we see Jacob going from Jacob, meaning deceiver, and now he's saying, you know what? Your name shall be Israel. Because you have struggled with God, and you struggled with people. Now let me ask you, or as a question I'm going to ask myself, how is this a blessing? How is changing my name being, I am someone who struggles with God and struggles with people, a blessing? It's a blessing because it is showing us a change not in physical nature, but in inner moral character. It shows us that actually God desires for us to struggle with Him, to wrestle with Him, because He doesn't want us to go anywhere else. He wants us to go back to Him over and over again, because it's in the wrestle that it causes you to draw so incredibly close to Him. I love this quote. It's a couple slides down, and it talks about this idea of a wrestle. It says, is it possible to wrestle with someone and not get uncomfortably close? Within seconds, you'll feel their hot breath in your face, their muscles tensing around you, their veins pounding against your skin. Wrestling God feels the same way. He wants you to experience His presence, skin against skin. He wants you to sweat, struggle, and strain, but most of all, He he wants you to be real. You see, in the middle of our doubts, I don't know about you, but when I have a sense of a doubt, my natural inclination is to push it away as far as I can. I don't want to own up to it. I want to push it aside and act like I never had that thought. But through this action, what actually blesses Jacob, he didn't recognize he was wrestling with God, but in this interaction, when he was showing us today, is God actually desires for us to wrestle with him in the midst of our doubt. Because again, it causes us to draw close to him. It causes us to go to him and be honest with him, and skin against skin. You can feel God's breath. And the thing is, God can take it. So often, as we're talk to different people, and sometimes we're afraid to go to God with doubts because he thinks he's going to judge us, or do you think that he's going to look at you differently? You know, God wants you to go nowhere else but to him. With all of your different doubts, whether you're doubting himself, whether Jesus is God, whether you doubt the Bible, whether science has some sort of influence on whether you think the Bible is true, whether it's about a relationship that you're currently trying to get into, or maybe that you should end a relationship. Maybe you're doubting your actual career path. Am I in the right job right now? Maybe you're doubting you're in the right major. Like, hey, I'm in this major. I've already changed it 3 different times, but I might have to change it a 4th time. It's with all of our different doubts, and God is constantly, through this idea of wrestling, saying, when you just draw close to me, when you come to me, I want to feel your sweat. I want to feel your presence. And it's through this idea of wrestle that it allows us to draw closer to God. And it is when we draw closer to God in this moment that we see this idea of, in the passage, of Jacob possibly winning the fight. Because if you go back a couple of different slides, it says that Jacob prevailed. And I want to make this very clear, because this idea, when you read the passage, it seems that Jacob won. Jacob won not because he defeated God. Jacob won because he left changed. Let me repeat that again. Jacob won not because he defeated God. Jacob won because his life, his inner character is now being changed. He left that interaction, that wrestle with God, a changed man. His inner moral character was changing. It is in this that when we press into this idea, when we go to God in prayer, when we wrestle through our doubts, it's going to lead us to this third idea. And this idea is this, is I believe that we need to begin to doubt our doubts. So the first thing we do is we pray to God. Secondly, we wrestle with God. And then thirdly, we doubt our doubts. Because I want to go back to the passage. I want to continue reading what's taking place. So again, he hears 400 men is about to attack him. He makes a plan. He finds himself wrestling with God. And now he leaves a changed man, but he also leaves with a limp. I want to see what takes place in Genesis chapter 33, verse 1. So it says, now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming towards him with 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 slave women. He put slaves and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead, bowed to the ground 7 times until he approached his brother. I want to pause there real quick. So remember, put yourself in his shoes. 400 men coming to attack him. His entire life he is running, but now he has a limp. He no longer has any choice to run. He physically can't run anymore. He ran against his brother 14 years ago, and now his brothers are just coming towards him. The very beginning of the verse says now. It seems to be immediately almost after that the sun begins to rise. God seems to bless him, and now 400 men are coming. I want to look at what happens next. In the middle of his doubt, this is what happens. This is what Esau does in verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him, and then they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the woman and the children, he asked, "Who are these?" And Jacob answered, "The children God has graciously given your servant." Then the slaves and their children approached and bowed down to him, and Leah and her children also approached and bowed down. And then Joseph and Rachel approached them and bowed down. So Esau said, "What do you mean by this whole procession I mean?" to find favor with you, my Lord, he replied. I have enough, my brother, Esau replied. Keep what you have. But Jacob said, no. Please, if I have found any favor with you, take this as a gift. For indeed, I have seen your face, and it is like seeing the face of God since you have accepted me. Please take my present that was brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and I have everything I need. So Jacob urged him, and he accepted. You see, in this moment, when he thought all things were not going to turn out his way, that now he physically can't run, what I love about this passage is because it completely flips it. The person that has been running his whole life has now found himself stuck because he has a hip that he no longer functions correctly. But now, the person that last time you heard him said is going to kill him, he is running at him full-fledged. But he's not running with a sword or a bow. No, he's running with his arms wide open to give him a hug. And with tears coming down Esau's face, and with tears coming down Jacob's face, all the doubt disappears. See, back again in Genesis chapter 31, God made him a promise. And this whole entire time, Jacob has been on this knife's edge between, God, you've made me a promise, but is my brother going to kill me? And now in this moment, after wrestling with God, after going to God in prayer, on the other side of his doubt, what he begins to see is Esau's face, which actually turns out to be God's face. What I love about this is that so often what I believe God does is God takes our greatest doubts and actually turns them into our greatest forms of victory. That things that cause the greatest doubt are actually the places where we see God move the most. I think one of the greatest evidence of this is actually Jesus himself. When you look to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's doubting this God. If there's anything you can do to take this cup from me, would you do it? Almost seeming to be doubting God's plan, but it's through Jesus going to the cross, surrendering his life to him, that we actually see the greatest form of victory. And this is again what I believe is true about this story and about wrestling with God. That the greatest acts of victory in our life often come on the other side of surrender. I'll say that one more time. The greatest acts of victory in our life often comes on the opposite side of surrender. See, when you wrestle with someone, the greatest act of humiliation is tapping out, saying, I can't do this. But actually, when it comes to Christianity in our own lives, the greatest act of victory does come from tapping out, saying, God, I can't do this. I need your help in the midst of it. Yes, I'm doubting whether you're going to show up, but God, would you help my unbelief? In Mark 9, you see the story of the Father coming to him and says, do you believe? He says, Lord, I believe, but would you help my unbelief? And God appreciates when you go to him completely honest, saying, God, I don't know what to do, but in this moment, I turn to you. So whatever you're going on in your life right now, what I'm praying again for our young adults community here, is that we could be a community people known by our unwavering faith and our unconditional love. That whenever we have doubts, whether about our own faith, our salvation, whether our job is correct, that we can go to one another and we can say, you know what? We're going to love you through this. Jude 22 says, be merciful to those who doubt. It is in this process of life that what I'm hoping for us is that we can go to God. And number one, that we would seek him in prayer. But two, we would learn this art of wrestle, not being afraid that God is a big God and he can take all of our problems. But thirdly, when we begin to possibly doubt our doubt, that the doubt that takes place in our life, you know what? We're not going to doubt what we believe that God's going to say. We're going to doubt the doubt. Step forward in faith and confidence. So as I close tonight, I want to read you this last quote. See, again, so often we pit faith against doubt. And what I love about this is it combines them. It says, true Christianity, however, is less like a TV dinner and more like a wok bowl. For those that don't know, it's just basically a big bowl that you cook with. And this faith and doubt are mixed together. It's chaotic and it's complicated and more difficult to make, but it sure tastes good. Faith isn't about pushing buttons, it's about getting into the fire. Faith is about inviting Jesus into your life, and it's about stepping into his. Faith is when the real you surrenders to the real God. But when you hold back, he won't move you forward. God can't bless the picky. This entire series, my hope and my goal is, especially in that last part, is I want us to be real and open and honest with God. And at least go to God and say, you know what, I'm not doing okay. And guess what? That's okay. But it's when we start to do that, it allows us the opportunity to draw close to him and also closer to each other. So would people go ahead and bow your heads and pray with me? Dear Lord, we just come to you today and we thank you. We thank you for being God. We thank you for being good. We thank you for being in control. Lord, we all experience different things in our lives right now, different forms of doubt, but what we know is true is that you are God and you are good and you're in control. So Lord, in the midst of our current doubts that we're all currently facing, my prayer and my hope is that we would go to you in prayer. That we would be completely honest with you, but then Lord, that we could begin to learn this art of wrestling. That we would go to you with our doubts, our insecurities, our fears, and we would get incredibly close to you. And Lord, from that, Lord, I pray that what we could come to see is what is true in your word, but also what is true about you. And that when any form of doubt comes in that goes against you, Lord, I pray that we adopt the doubt. And we step forward in faith and confidence, knowing that you are God and you are good and you're in control. So Lord, we love you so much. In your precious holy name. So tonight, we are not going to have worship afterwards. We're just going to jump straight into our table time and ask these questions. So we're going to have 3 questions up on the screen. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to go scan the slide of the QR code up there, and it'll allow you the opportunity to ask any questions, and then Brandon and I will come up afterwards and we'll try our best to answer any of your guys' questions. So thank you so much.